Welcome everyone to today's session. We'll give it a minute for everyone to get on and settle in. It's great to see the amount of interest and registration for this event. So we're expecting quite a few people on the session today. So looking forward. All right, I see numbers are slowly adding up. I'm sure others will be coming on, but let's kick it off. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is a collaboration between SourceUp and the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, building on the long collaboration between IDH and Conservation International, where each of these initiatives are housed under. My name is Niels Haak. I'm with Conservation International. And in my role, I have the pleasure of leading the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, and I'll be moderating today's session. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Jurisdictional Action Resource Hub. And we encourage you to share any questions that you may have throughout the event in the Q&A function. And if you run into any technical issues, please contact Daniel at veles@idhtrade.org. So just to frame things up a little bit, again, this is a collaborative event taking place under the umbrella of the SourceUp-led Jurisdictional Action Network and the Sustainable Coffee Challenge Landscapes Lab. So that's quite a lot. Different audiences, different groups, different networks coming together. So recognizing that we have a pretty diverse audience today, and to situate everyone, we wanted to start with a very brief update on the Jurisdictional Action Network led by SourceUp, as well as from the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. So first on the Jurisdictional Action Network, after a bit of a pause earlier in the year, the community was fully relaunched and is up and running again. Over the summer, the JAN was handed over from the Tropical Forest Alliance to SourceUp, the platform where landscape initiatives are share continuous updates, report on their goals and maturity, and showcase opportunities for companies to engage. This also means that the Jurisdictional Action Resource Hub had a bit of an upgrade. In addition to the usual guidance and resources for companies, it now pulls in regular updates directly from landscape initiatives via SourceUp that I hope you are familiar with. So if you haven't checked it out for a while, we encourage you to go to the Jurisdictional Action Resource Hub, visit it regularly, bookmark it, and find the news stories, tools, and examples from the field, including the tools that will be highlighted in today's event. Looking ahead, Jan will keep organizing these type of webinars, share practical, insightful content for companies that are investing in landscape and jurisdictional initiatives, so also in the year to come. So stay tuned. And then moving side to the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. Again, Sustainable Coffee Challenge is housed within Conservation International. And as part of our kind of learning agenda, we convened the Landscapes Lab, really to promote, guide, and unlock jurisdictional and landscape action within coffee. So we run this Landscape Lab in collaboration with the International Coffee Organization's Task Force, and the work is being supported through the World Bank-led FOLA program. And if we can go to the next slide, an important update from the Sustainable Coffee Challenge is actually that this December, we're celebrating 10 years of Sustainable Coffee Challenge. We launched the Sustainable Coffee Challenge back in December 2015. So if you do the math, we're 10 years in. And in recognition of this important milestone, we're teaming up with Innovation Forum to host Coffee Landscapes Forum on December 11th. So if you signed up for this session, it means that you're interested in landscapes and coffee. So that definitely means that you should be joining us on December 11th as well. So in that event, through expert speakers, panels, and Q&A, we'll explore how to essentially, we plan to build on the past decade of partnership and collaboration through the Sustainable Coffee Challenge towards kind of some of the strategies and direction that we're taking with the challenge moving forward. It's an open event, so we again encourage anyone to join us. So let's, with that, all of those administrative notes, let's dive into today's content. So I'm sure that all of you are very well aware of the climate impacts, the complex sourcing dynamics, and the rapidly evolving market requirements that the coffee industry, like many commodities, or probably all commodity industries, are confronted with. And really between the conversations and the work of CI, IDA, SourceUp, we really see the need that while farm level action is essential, this increasingly should be housed and embedded within broader landscape level action that provides the opportunity for holistic solutions. And Landscape and Jurisdictional Initiatives, or LJI in short, really offer that strategic route to manage risks and deliver impacts at scale, bringing public and private sector together around the table, around shared goals, investment, and transparent reporting. So with that context, we have been working on a set of resources and tools and highlighting two of those today. First of all, this Investment for Impact and Resilience, a Coffee Industry Guidebook on Landscape and Jurisdictional Initiative, very much as well, it's more than a 101 guide, but really as a practical guidance for that goes into the business case on why landscape and jurisdictional investment in coffee is so key, and offering really concrete and actionable steps for companies. The guidebook was developed between CI, IDA, SourceUp, and published under the umbrella of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, and again supported through the Fowler program led by the World Bank. So that we'll dive in, and then the other tool that we're diving into has been led by SourceUp specifically, the SourceUp Landscape Reporting Explorer. This enables companies and landscape facilitators to browse and compare 11 key sustainability frameworks to determine how to measure and report the impact data from landscape initiatives. So on the one hand, we have kind of the foundational knowledge on landscapes, and on the other hand, we have kind of that reporting guide and tool. So going to go to the next slide. I won't dive into this, but we'll have 4 excellent speakers with us today speaking to this. So first of all, we'll have Anne, my colleague at Conservation International, and then Romy from SourceUp to present those 2 tools. And then we'll turn into company perspectives. We'll hear from Simon at Walmart Foundation and Molly at Unilever, kind of bringing their firsthand experience from where they're sitting in the industry. And then we'll turn it out and open it up for Q&A with the audience. So a pretty packed agenda. So again, don't hesitate to drop any questions that you might have during the presentations or the interventions in the Q&A box. And we'll gather those during the Q&A section and address some of those, and hopefully have a good discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on the mic to Anne to start with the industry guidebook. Go ahead, Anne.
Great, thank you so much, Niels. We're really excited that this resource is available to the coffee sector. As Niels mentions, it's called Investments for Impact and Resilience. And that's really what this guide aims to facilitate, is the ability of the coffee sector to drive investments that create the real meaningful impact that we know is needed for long-term resilience in coffee producing landscapes. So more than an academic reference or a conceptual guide, it's really meant to serve as a how-to guidebook for sector engagement in LJIs. So I invite you to download it and explore it. You'll see it's organized around key conceptual questions as well as concrete steps based on where you are in your investment journey. So it's easy to skip around based on your interest. But for our conversation today, what I'll do is provide a quick overview of the guide, why we felt it was important for the coffee sector specific context, and then discuss what it offers for decision makers in the sector. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll start with that first question, which is, why do we need a guidebook that's specific to the sector and to ensuring that coffee sector actors in particular are able to successfully engage in LJIs in order to achieve their specific outcomes? And the answer to that question is really that the transition for coffee landscapes in particular to more sustainable models is particularly urgent and particularly complex given their context and origin. So coffee companies face converging and emerging pressures, whether we're talking about climate change or persistent livelihood challenges that producers face. And these are really systemic challenges that no single actor can solve alone in their entirety. They're also coming to a head in a regulatory environment that is quickly changing. We're seeing evolving compliance requirements and demand for increasingly granular transparency, engagement, investment, and monitoring in origin. So there's a definite need for clarity and coordination in the sector around the roles, the results, and the impacts against these complex and shared challenges in origin. And that's not to say that there isn't really meaningful work going on. We know that these investments are taking place. Companies have made really meaningful progress through certifications or supply chain level projects. But what LJIs do is they give us the clarity or the opportunity to make sure that those efforts are not fragmented. Often when we see project-based initiatives, they're in isolation. As you can see in this graphic on the left, maybe one is investing in improvements to productivity or to quality, or on facilitating access to financing or diversification of incomes, or on the transition to more regenerative agricultural models. And all of those investments are important. They're all necessary, but perhaps not sufficient. And they're not sufficient in the context of coffee for two reasons. The first is scale. And the second I've mentioned, which is kind of the systemic nature of many of the challenges that we're facing in origin. To start briefly with scale, we know that this is a real challenge for the investments that are needed to ensure sustainable supply and prosperous livelihoods for coffee in the future. The vast majority of coffee producers are smallholders. 85% of the 12.5 million producers worldwide manage fewer than 2 hectares. And the most vulnerable farmers who require the most support from the sector are often located in quite remote and hard to reach areas. So it's really hard for one company, let alone one project, to move the needle on supply and sustainability outcomes in a cost-effective way, even when we're keeping the scope of investment quite tight within the farm gate. And this actually leads to the second constraint to impact through project-based initiatives, which is that they aren't necessarily equipped to address those systemic landscape level issues that have real material importance for business performance, for livelihoods, for sustainability, and those are beyond the farm gate. So, for example, coffee production depends on many complex factors: the regeneration of healthy ecosystems, maintenance of unique microclimates, or management of watersheds that provide the necessary conditions for coffee production, especially in the context of climate change. But those factors themselves are dependent on policies and practices that go beyond the purview of just coffee farmers or just coffee companies. They depend on the use of practices by neighboring land users, which may not even be in the coffee sector. They depend on local governments and other actors. So LJIs just provide a way to address these broader dynamics. They align the actions of coffee farmers, coffee companies, other companies and sectors, governments, land users, civil society, so that their investments are reinforcing each other rather than potentially competing. Without this coordination, we see that project level investments can leave real value on the table, or worse, they may accidentally work at cross purposes with each other or with national policies and neighboring interventions. So LJIs just provide the opportunity for companies to look at their corporate sustainability and sourcing strategies and align them with local priorities and plans that can drive more cost-effective impact at scale. So we know the need is quite urgent. The opportunity is real. But as you can imagine, from this type of multi-stakeholder and collaborative approach, it can be quite complex to navigate. And there's a need for us to accelerate, given the urgency, we need to accelerate this learning curve in order to get to action and impact. And that's what this guidebook aims to do, is provide practical points of entry for companies to align and engage with LJI approaches based on their own needs for sustainability and sourcing investments. So if we can keep going on to the guidebook, I'll give a quick overview. Oh, thank you. I forgot about our snazzy animation. Basically what the guide does is it says it helps a company to navigate this very complex world of LJIs and say, look, you are here, and this is the next best step you can take on your LJI journey. So to provide an overview of how the guide aims to do that, as I mentioned, our goal was to try to help coffee companies and supply chain actors to turn LJI concepts into concrete action. So as folks here in the Jurisdictional Action Network know, there's already really excellent guidance on how LJIs are structured, about the principles behind them and the systems required to operate them. For companies, what's often missing is the clear, concrete direction on how to actually get started. And this guide is designed to cut through the complexity. You don't need to be an LJI expert to use it. It won't try to make you an LJI expert, although it will link to all of those really detailed and rigorous resources if you would like to become an LJI expert and take that deep dive. But what it will help you to do is to identify your entry point and understand that next best step based on your business needs. So to do that, the guide starts by answering core conceptual questions from the perspective of the coffee sector specifically. So what are landscape and jurisdictional initiatives? Why does the coffee sector need them? What is the current state of landscape investment? And then what is the business case for that engagement? And then it organizes that actual engagement into 4 practical steps. So the first is just understanding your business needs from for LJI engagement using 4 lean pen to paper assessments. I'll spotlight a few of those in a little bit. The second is just to identify and assess existing initiatives for investment using existing platforms where companies can locate relevant LJIs, assess their maturity, look at the landscape's investment needs, and then see how that aligns strategically with the company's objectives. Then with potential LJIs identified for investment, step 3 gets really tactical in terms of how to integrate your company's strategies, targets, and monitoring systems into shared LJI systems. Again, the goal of this guide is not to duplicate strategies or create new ones, is to help to align them with broader work in the landscape. So it walks you through how to proactively plan for the types of coordination that is needed to generate, report, the types of impact claims that you need for your own reporting purposes within the context of your own individual and collective action through an LJI. And so then finally, step 4 helps companies to then plan for sustained engagement, adaptive management, and replication at scale across other landscapes at time, because that is the ultimate goal of an LJI approach, is that we're trying to create lasting, holistic change at scale across coffee origins. So let's move on to the next slide. I just want to provide a few specific examples before closing out in terms of how the guide tries to create what I'll call like a tactical learning curve for action. So each section includes a summary and immediate next steps that you can take after reading that section. Where needed or helpful, there are overviews of key concepts so that you can get oriented within the world of LJIs or find further reading where needed. For example, this graphic briefly summarizes how LJI governance structures can help to coordinate multi-stakeholder implementation, monitoring systems, and impact claims. And then it also will include a few technical callouts for special interest topics and case studies. So for example, there's a section that points to Conservation International's paper on principles for high integrity insetting for scope 3 reductions, if that's one of the objectives that might bring you to invest in a landscape initiative. And one of those features is also the work of our next speaker, who we'll get to shortly. Next slide, please. All right. So ultimately, here I have just a few spotlights on specific tools, but the goal through this guidebook is that at the end of every section, you need to feel that you're able to put pen to paper. Otherwise, we're not generating the type of action that we want in the sector. So some of the tools that companies could immediately apply from this guide include a double materiality assessment that's aligned with SBTN supply chain pressure categories and other international reporting frameworks. We have a site selection heat map template with data sources to help you evaluate the risks, opportunities, strategic fit for your investment priorities in origin. There are also guidance on how to find and use platforms like SourceUp or Landscape that already exist and can help you to find an LJI and then use criteria to assess their maturity. And then planning considerations for how you can integrate your monitoring needs and impact attribution requirements. There's a whole world of complex reporting requirements. And if you're going to invest in an LJI, you need to know that you're getting the types of impact claims that are important perhaps for your business and sourcing strategies or for your sustainability reporting without necessarily needing to become an MRV specialist. How can you plan ahead and establish the necessary systems to make sure that you're able to make those high quality claims through your engagement in an LJI? And I wanted to stop there because that leads us to Romy, our next speaker, who was a great contributor to this section of the guidebook. And we'll be talking about the Landscape Reporting Explorer, which is the deeper dive into that world of reporting as it relates to LJIs in the coffee sector. So over to Romy.
Thank you, Anne. Hi, everyone. My name is Romy Sterks, and I'm a senior officer in the SourceUp team at IDH, where I specifically work on data credibility and reporting from landscape initiatives. And I'm really excited to present to you today a reporting tool that we've been working on for a while now, that we really believe will help coffee companies that are investing in landscape initiatives or are planning to really identify those frameworks and metrics to report on their engagement in the landscapes and, as Anne nicely summarized, really get the most out of it and be able to make claims from that action and that investment. Thank you. So similarly to Anne, before diving into the tool, I first want to focus on the why. Why did we see the need to, kind of do this research on reporting frameworks and make it into a tool? First of all, SourceUp's vision is to establish landscape engagement as the norm for sustainable sourcing in global supply chains, which is really ambitious. And how do we tackle that? Next, please. We do that by trying to find solutions that make it easier and more attractive for companies to invest in those landscape initiatives. And we identify barriers or obstacles and try to kind of find solutions to those. And one barrier that we have identified for a while now is that there really is a lack of clarity on opportunities to integrate data from landscape engagement in corporate sustainability reporting. So we see that companies that are investing in landscape initiatives, so also coffee companies, really see the benefit. They see the change and the impact of the holistic action, but it's not super clear how it can help towards compliance with mandatory frameworks or to really get that additional recognition for these efforts and this investment. And so what is our proposed solution? We assessed, together with the consultant, 19 mandatory and voluntary sustainability frameworks, and we kind of shaped those into a interactive tool, which we call the Landscape Reporting Explorer. So let's get a bit more into the details of that. Thank you. So how did we start this process? We commissioned Solar Partners, which is an excellent sustainability consultancy based also here in the Netherlands, to assess 19 key voluntary and mandatory reporting frameworks. You can see the assessed frameworks on the left side of the slide. Maybe what's good to know is that we really went into the process with a focus on the coffee sector. So we also, together with the IDH coffee team, try to think about which are the most essential mandatory and voluntary frameworks for coffee companies. But then in the end, out of those 19, there's only one that is really specific to coffee, which is the coffee SR code. And that one didn't even end up in the final tool because it was not kind of compatible. So it's also very useful for other companies that source commodities from sourcing regions and are active in landscapes there. So how did we assess the frameworks? First of all, we for each framework, we checked if there was any type of reference to landscape engagement. And that was the hard part because we do see that more and more frameworks are referring to landscape engagement, but most frameworks are using different terms. So there's a lack of alignment, different terms, different definitions also. So we really had to search on different terms like landscape initiatives, but also jurisdictional, area-based approaches, multi-stakeholder approaches. And if we got a hit on any of those, then we looked at the term that framework used and the definition, and we also benchmarked it against the ISEAL criteria. For those of you who don't know this, ISEAL has defined 4 core criteria with which you can kind of recognize an efficient landscape initiative. It needs to be of a certain scale. There needs to be a multi-stakeholder process, and then also sustainability, collective sustainability goals and monitoring. So we kind of checked, okay, does the framework's definition align with that or not? Then we also looked at the specific data points or indicators related to landscape engagement in each framework. And we also looked at, are there any other opportunities to integrate collective data from landscape engagement? And so what were the kind of outputs or products from this process? We have a very lengthy assessment report that goes into like a deep analysis of each framework, and then also a set of recommendations for companies, framework owners, and landscape conveners, which is also available in a concise slide deck. But then the tool I really want to talk about today is the Landscape Reporting Explorer, which is an interactive Excel database enabling the user to identify and compare metrics from 11 of these frameworks on key sustainability topics, but also on their suitability to report from landscape engagement. So then how did we go about this scoring? Really wanted to give each framework a score based on overall how suitable it is to report on landscape engagement. And the highest score would be if the framework is really explicitly referring to landscape initiatives, area-based approaches, etc. And the landscape initiative itself becomes kind of the question or the central focus of the reporting. So examples of indicators would be when they ask a company, what is the number of landscape initiatives you invested in, where are they located, where are the commodities, the area covered, etc. Then there's an intermediate one, which where the framework does not explicitly refer to landscape engagement, but it does allow the use of collective data. This could be data resulting from collective action or risk data. So, for example, about soil health or deforestation risk level. And then the lowest score would be for those frameworks who only allow data from a company's own supply chain. That we saw quite a lot with climate frameworks, because of course, when we talk about carbon reduction and CO2 emissions, most of the time companies have to really show that it's linked to their own farmers. However, I do want to emphasize that it's still possible to take action on this and get this data in the context of a landscape program. It might even be easier to get that data. I hope our company speakers might be able to speak to that later. So yeah, that's it for the scoring. And then maybe the most interesting slide for this audience. What were the concrete recommendations for companies when it comes to engaging and reporting on landscape engagement? Thank you. First of all, it would be to invest in landscape initiatives as a whole, because that gives you a chance to participate in the establishment of a strong shared MRV system, to do data collection across different ESG topics, and also to cause long-term and holistic impact. The second one would be to engage early in the initiative or align expectations when joining an existing initiative. So if you join early, you can really help shape data collection and reporting processes. If you join an existing initiative, which also has its advantages because it's already, well established and working, it's all about aligning expectations from the get-go. So asking the right questions, for example, ask the stakeholders of the program, which data are you already collecting, which type, in which format, what's the frequency, and then also sharing your company's own requirements, so your reporting cycle, which frameworks you report to, and the level of assurance you need for the data. Then number 3 would be to keep in mind that you can access pre-competitive risk data for your due diligence strategy through participating in landscape programs, because there's many stakeholders involved and often also government is involved. You can often get access to pre-competitive risk data about your sourcing region that could be harder to obtain individually. And then secondly, you can use this risk data in risk identification and also in your mitigation strategy. And just the fact of participating in a landscape program can already be a risk mitigation strategy in itself, because you're working with stakeholders, you're looking at impact across many topics. Yeah, so keep that in mind. And then the last one would be to use narrative reporting to demonstrate your landscape engagement. So even if most ESG frameworks don't explicitly reference landscape engagement, they do offer space for disclosing engagement in these type of initiatives. So there in those spaces, you can really explain how your landscape engagement supports broader sustainability goals. And then I think it's time for the demo. So I will share my screen. Oh, yeah, no, not yet. Sorry. So I want to give you a quick demo of the tool, and then specifically show you how to use it for 2 use cases. So first of all, I want to show you how you can kind of filter out those frameworks and indicators that explicitly reference landscape engagement. So that's where you can really get that additional recognition for participating in the landscape initiative. And the second use case would be using the tool to align on specific metrics that the landscape program will monitor if you're working on a specific ESG topic. Let's say you're working on a biodiversity project or program within the landscape. How do you kind of use the tool to, in the discussion with stakeholders, align on these are the metrics we need to monitor? So I'll share my screen now. Danielle, could you please confirm that you can see my screen? That's a yes. I can't hear anything.
Your
Okay.
screen is on.
Great, thanks. So very quickly, if you open the tool, you will first see the introduction tab. I won't go through it right now to save some time, but if you want to use it, I recommend you just read through it. It's not a lot of information, and it will really help you get the most out of the tool. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to go immediately to tab 3, which is called Deep Dive into Metrics. And this is just like the full database of frameworks and metrics. So here on the left-hand side, there's some additional instructions on how to use it. And on the right-hand side, there's the scoring mechanism for the suitability on landscape reporting. And then to give you an overview of the information you can access here, first of all, we have all the frameworks. Then we have the indicators and the metric or unit linked to that indicator. Then we kind of have the broad ESG pillar, the key theme, so biodiversity, climate, governance, etc. We have the sub-theme. Then we indicate whether it's a quantitative or qualitative data point that's required. Then the suitability score of the indicator for reporting on landscape engagements, and also where you can find the metric within the specific framework. And then now maybe to show you the first use case, if you're already investing in a landscape initiative and you want to know where you can really report on that explicitly, you can just go to this column and filter on the score number 3, explicit reporting on landscape engagement. And then we will see over here that both CDP and SBTN have indicators that will enable you to report on that engagement. For example, area covered by landscape or jurisdictional initiative, and other indicators. And then for the second use case, so let's say that you're working on a biodiversity project or program within the landscape program with stakeholders, and you want to agree on which indicators and metrics to monitor, then I would suggest that you filter on the key theme. So here we would filter on biodiversity. And then you even have a range of sub-themes, so you can really compare them on a very granular level. Let's say that we would like to see the indicators on ecosystem extent and condition. And then here on the left, you will see that there are several frameworks that have indicators on this sub-theme. We have CSRD, GRI, SBTN, and TNFD. And you can easily just compare the indicators and metrics here. So yeah, that's a very quick demo, but I hope it sparked your interest. Maybe the last thing I would like to say is that you can find all of these resources, so the assessment report, the slides, and the tool on the Jurisdictional Action Resource Hub, and also that we really aim to have this as a living tool that we can hopefully update whenever there's frameworks updating their indicators or by integrating new frameworks as well. So with that, I'm handing it back over to Niels.
Thanks so much from me, and thanks also to Anne. Super insightful and clear presentations on the new tools. So I'm sure that a lot in the audience are ready to dive in and explore the tool and the guide. Like Romy also mentioned, and as you can see, the tools and resources are available on the resources page of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge website, as well as the Jurisdictional Action Network. Continue to drop in your questions in the Q&A. And well, with everyone convinced about the business case and inspired to take or scale action in LGIs across coffee producing regions, or even equipped to track and report progress, I think it's time to move from theory to action. So I'm excited that we will hear from 2 company perspectives, companies that have been working in landscapes for a while now. So I'm excited that we're joined by Simon Hall. We can go to the next slide. Simon is Director of Strategic Initiatives, Forest and Nature at the Walmart Foundation, and Molly Leisner is Senior Manager, Impact and Assurance, Sustainable Sourcing at Unilever. So I'll do two kind of sets up a quick Q&A, starting with Simon and then moving to Molly, before we'll open up for Q&A with the audience. So Simon, starting with you, thanks again for joining us today. Can you speak a little bit to the how and why Walmart, both as a business but then also philanthropically, has been involved in landscape initiatives in coffee? Why are they important for you guys? Can you give some example of the work that you're engaged in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. That's a pleasure to join you all. Yeah, so landscape initiatives, really important part of our nature strategy, as well as sort of our work on climate, people, et cetera. And overall, it's a really important part of our ambition to become a regenerative company. And they play a key role in helping achieve some of our public policies and public goals. So this includes, for example, our forest policy on sourcing deforestation conversion-free commodities, as well as helping contribute to our big nature goal, which is all about protection, restoration, and more sustainable management, 50 million acres of land, 1 million square miles of ocean. When we think more about like the how, for years, we've kind of used a good, better, best continuous improvement approach to drive innovation and sort of advance progress with our suppliers. When we think about the good sort of level, it's practice adoption. And as you sort of move up that maturity curve towards better, it's sort of like stacking multiple practices or leveraging certification. And the best, sort of that top tier level, is really reserved for place-based initiatives or our landscape and jurisdictional approaches. We work on land and sea, so we sort of refer to them as place-based. We have them in sort of that best-in-class level for a few reasons. I think one is that they help us as tools to address the underlying root causes of a lot of the major sustainability challenges that we face in our supply chain, just generally. So that's one. The other reason is that we see them as a real important tool to help build resilience for both people and nature in the places that matter. So that's kind of the what of why they're important. But I think just as important, or arguably more important, is the how these sort of tools and these management approaches get deployed. And when they're done in the right way, there's a huge potential, a really powerful combination. And that's really around working at scale, and then through governance models that can really be durable. And so it's that scale and durability combined with those other sort of elements of root cause and resilience that really make them an interesting set of tools for us, particularly as we think about the work that we're doing philanthropically and across the business with our suppliers. And I think we've been working on this for like 5 years. We have over 30 initiatives that we've supported across the foundation and with our suppliers. This spans a lot of different commodities, including coffee, across like forests, grasslands, and ocean ecosystems. And I would just sort of like highlight quickly like some of the work, particularly that we've been doing in coffee in the Huila landscape, that I think is a really interesting sort of just case study of how when you can deploy philanthropy in the way that is able to complement procurement in specific places, and that sort of combination is really effective. So I think the foundation has been supporting some work with CI in Huila, supported the Hialeah Pact, helping build capacity, create some of the enabling conditions for sort of that like base infrastructure for both stakeholder engagement, MRV, sort of what kind of tools exist both in SourceUp and Landscape, some of the great examples of like how that's done. And then we've also been able to bring in the supply chain to complement that, to help expand the area of coverage of that landscape, as well as to drive more impact in the specific places. And I think that's a really interesting way that we've sort of sought to sort of leverage the tools that we have at our disposal to really move this agenda forward. Back over to you.
Great. Thanks for that, Simon. And I appreciate kind of the three-tiered approach. And thinking, kind of responding to that, you see it as a tool. But if we flip that, it's not necessarily always the easiest tool to apply, right? So we also hear a lot of it's like landscape initiatives are slow, they're clunky. You spoke to the governance models. Governance can be tricky. So if you can just point out to what do you see as kind of key learnings or challenges that you guys ran into, and what would you advise others who might be embarking on this journey?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, probably more than what we have time to cover here together. But let me try to tie them back to the things the earlier presentation. So I think one of the ones is we hear a lot from suppliers and others that kind of really struggle to kind of like wrap their heads around like what are these approaches? How are they different from what we've been doing? Like what's the differential between like the supply chain sort of approach that we've sort of more accustomed to, and what does this look like in practice? How do they work? What are the benefits, and like how can they get involved? So all of like the questions that sort of the guide is looking to address. And I think there have been resources published around like how to do that generally, or what these sort of things look like in a more generic sense. But what I really like is how this is really focused specifically on coffee and like the unique challenges and opportunities that exist in that sector. Um, Setting that out in really simple, clear, accessible language, I think is super, super important. And I think like the guidebook is a great sort of resource in that way in terms of like helping bring that to the coffee sector. Um, and so I think that's one area. I mean, I'd also love to see how that sort of gets like adapted and sort of maybe sort of split up into more bite-sized kind of pieces. For in my role, like it's often difficult to like, the 50-page reports are super helpful. I love them. The bandwidth and sort of patience that some of the business sort of leaders have for digesting that and fully taking that all in is always a little tricky sometimes. But I think overall that's really helping us move in the right direction with a commodity specific look at some of these things. And then reporting is a huge challenge, and like connecting the dots between all of the different metrics and frameworks that exist. And as someone who helps support and actually does some of the claims, we have so much documentation that's needed for that to really produce high integrity claims and high integrity disclosure out publicly. And it's complex. And having tools that kind of help demystify this complex maze of reporting and metrics and how does this thing sync over to here? How can we reflect it? I think is really helpful. I mean, ultimately, like longer term, personally, I would love to see us get to a point where like we can just report once through our channel, and that is the single source of truth that is used for these other frameworks. But that's not necessarily reality today. And so, in the meantime, while we're working towards that sort of dream state that would save everybody a ton of time, because nobody wants to report 10 times because it's asked 10 different ways. But having tools like this that sort of help you do that crosswalking between initiatives and across metrics, I think is valuable and is a helpful tool.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And kind of passing that almost on to Molly. Molly, how do you, from your perspective, see that, and in terms of kind of jumping on the pains of reporting, if I can summarize Simon's point, like how does Unilever use some of the impact data from Landscape Initiative, both internal and external? And does what Simon says resonate a lot with you?
Yes, definitely. When Simon says that ideally one day we could have one source of truth, that that is a wish that I also have and that Unilever shares. I think when it comes to the data from landscape initiatives, the most important use for Unilever is to manage that landscape initiative. So data has to be useful. It has to be able to track progress and to be used to design for improvement. If it's not doing that, but it is reporting against standards, then the data is not actually providing its full purpose. Outside of managing and design, a big thing for Unilever is being able to internally prove the return on investment, because increasingly companies like Unilever have limited resources, and so it's very competitive. Should we be spending these resources on a landscape initiative of coffee in India, or should we be spending it restoring mangroves in Ecuador? And so we constantly need to have data to prove and justify the work that we want to do in landscape initiatives. And then lastly, there is the external reporting, whether it's the assured corporate goals, whether it's project level benefits that we put into communications. There's a lot of different ways in which we put this data in the public, to both from a transparency perspective, but also from the perspective of showcasing the work Unilever is involved in.
Thanks, Molly. On your point in terms of return on investment, and I think that's a pain point that we hear quite often, and even from kind of landscape level projects versus supply chain level projects, where the supply chain level feels for many more of like a return on investment rather than a broader investment in landscapes. How do you see that? What do you see as the main benefits there, and where has Unilever been involved?
So Unilever does a bit of both. And I think we are slowly learning where each approach is better. I think if you're trying to influence your physical inventory, so your physical scope 3 inventory, then strict supply chain boundaries can be very useful. The problem there is that a lot of what we do is around farming and agriculture, and farms are holistic systems. It's very hard to parcel them up into productive land, not productive land, one crop or another crop. A lot of farms are run as family businesses, family entities, and there's a lot going on. And a landscape initiative allows you to support a farm as a whole, regardless of what crop is being grown, regardless of whether parts of it are productive and parts of it maybe are not. For example, shade trees or just agroforestry in general. So I think that landscape initiatives are a better reflection of how agricultural systems actually work. So supply chains are a little bit more arbitrary. There's the cost element, of course, which is that if we're at a landscape level, there are more players involved, so we can share costs, which is wonderful for companies like Unilever. And then there's also the leverage and the influence. So if you're working at a sector level and you need to work with sector organizations, whether it's unions or it's cooperatives or it's local government institutions, having one known and recognized brand of a landscape initiative makes it much easier to then influence those parties and to work in partnership. It's a lot harder if you have lots of small initiatives. Each person has to come along and ask for or try and get buy-in, and it's quite time consuming compared to doing it all at once.
Yeah, that resonates a lot, and so thanks for that. And it reflects on my end too, is like perhaps even in today's session there were companies or organizations, people on the call who are like, oh, Unilever speaking in a coffee session. And I think that also speaks to the point around like at times we need to put our kind of commodity blinders off and to think about like how do we bring different industries across the landscape together, right? So thanks for your perspectives, and Simon also thank you. With the time that we have left, we do want to open it up to Q&A from the audience. So if you haven't already, feel free to drop in questions in the Q&A chat. I will call out one question that I see come in. Do you expect more reporting frameworks to integrate investments and achieved outcomes in landscape initiatives in the future? I think all of us could answer that, that we are hoping that it will be the case. I don't know, coming from Molly and Simon, is this, in terms of conversations that you're in terms of the disclosures that you're doing yourself, is this what you're seeing, like a trend that it's emerging? Either one, jump in.
I could offer some thoughts. It's an interesting question. I think like maybe I have a little bit more of a cautious approach to this one, just because it's so challenging. I mean, on one hand, like yes, ultimately we need to be driving towards outcomes and away from like process and practice and really sort of being able to demonstrate how all of that stuff ladders up to the big sort of ambitious outcomes that we want. However, true outcomes take a long time, are super complex, require a multitude of factors, right? The whole purpose of the landscape approach, the whole premise around that. And so I would much rather see reporting on outcomes really owned by the landscape itself as like the governance and entity that's doing the collective MRV, and us being able to show up and say like, hey, here's how we invested in sort of working and helping advance the goals of that initiative and how it's contributing to outcomes. But you can't like put the supply chain on the hook for an outcome and sort of say like, hey, individual company A, how have you delivered biodiversity outcomes in this place? Because no single individual actor can actually achieve that on their own. This is the whole premise around the collective approach, right? So if the outcomes require collective action, the entity responsible for delivering on that is the collective, by definition. And so like just how we think about those roles and responsibilities and how companies are able to demonstrate that they're contributing to that in a meaningful way and in a transparent way, that I think is the balance that I think we need to see moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree in terms of where the measurement should be and where the ownership of those outcomes should be. A lot of the reporting frameworks that are coming up in the future are regulatory, or at least are being wrapped into regulatory requirements for corporate entities like Unilever. And so the focus is more on, has Unilever done the right analysis of the environmental and social risks to us as a business and the effects or impacts we're having as a business on environment and social systems. And so I think the method or the mode of delivery, whether it's landscape or supply chain, won't necessarily be explicit within these reporting frameworks. They will just more and more ask you, what jurisdictions or what landscapes are you affecting, both positively and negatively, and how does that landscape impose risks on Unilever? And we as a company then need to be able to express that in an accurate and a satisfying way. So I don't actually think that specific modes of implementation like landscape initiatives will be pulled out. I think it's up to companies like Unilever to translate the work we do into explaining the risks and opportunities for corporates when it comes to social and environmental systems.
Yeah, I hear you. So which then also doesn't get to like, how do we engage in landscape initiative to check the box on reporting frameworks, basically, but kind of treat it as a holistic approach. I appreciate that. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, so unless there are immediate questions that came in, we'll take one. No, we're really otherwise we'll run over. There was another interesting question around communication. I think we can talk a lot about it. Probably have a follow-up session on claims and communication, which we might want to unpack in one of those future kind of bite-sized pieces that Simon was calling for. So I can happily take that on. I do want to thank everyone for attending today, listening. Do encourage everyone, you can go to the next to dive into the tools, the guide, really equip yourself and take those initial steps on this journey. Moving forward for the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, the kind of landscape and jurisdictional initiatives is a key priority that we'll continue to drive, and I know what's in the name for the Jurisdictional Action Network as well. So we'll be continuing to explore collaboration between organizations and initiatives on this to deliver these type of guidance and hand-holding tools that we see a need for, and we hear a need for in the industry. So with that, I want to thank everyone again for participating today. Do feel free to join us for our 10-year anniversary event December 11th. And do reach out if you have any questions or want to continue the dialogue with us. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.